During its heyday, BioWare was a force to be reckoned with. For many fans of the RPG genre, the Canadian developer was the go-to studio. IPs such as Baldur's Gate, Dragon Age or Knights of the Old Republic are some of BioWare's best and many people's all-time favorite games. So it's no surprise that the same holds true for the Mass Effect games. Well, you know, at least the initial trilogy. These went on to become one of the most successful and highest rated video game franchises of all time. And even 7 years after the last good Mass Effect game was released, you're still bound to find players wanting to replay those games. My name is Luke, and in this video we want to focus on the first game, which was released in 2007, and find out how well it holds up today. Let's get right into it. Mass Effect is a third-person shooter action RPG set in space at the point where humanity has advanced far enough for space travel being as easy as taking a plane. Throughout multiple star systems, several giant constructions called mass relays were built in the past for the usage of interstellar travel. These ancient constructions are connected to each other and enable instantaneous transit between multiple locations throughout the Milky Way. Thanks to that, the different parts of the galaxy are now linked, allowing any kind of species to interact with each other and form a sort of government and a community to protect the galaxy. Eventually humans would discover the relays, but not without any complications, one might add, and humanity finds itself tangled up deeply in intergalactic politics as a result. Our story takes place 26 years after humans made first contact with the rest of the galaxy. You take control of the Alliance soldier Commander Shepard, who's currently being investigated to become part of a special force called the Spectres. The Spectres, which is sort of a special tactical unit, are a group of carefully selected agents who are allowed to work outside the law to get any job done. Shepard possibly becoming the first human to ever join the Spectres is considered a big deal and an important step for humanity to gain influence in the galaxy. However, during an investigation on the human colony Eden Prime to recover a beacon of a fallen race that vanished 50,000 years ago, things go south as the planet finds itself under attack by a machine race called the Geth. The leader of the robots turns out to be one of the Spectres themselves, but despite their best effort, Shepard manages to fight off the Geth attack, and upon reaching the beacon, he receives an alarming vision regarding the fate of the universe. Shepard then takes it upon himself to expose and stop the rogue Spectre, and figure out the mystery behind his vision and the lurking threat called the Reapers. Mass Effect's narrative is highly immersive thanks to memorable characters, a complex world, and the ability to interact with the world around you in any way you want to. There's almost a near infinite level of branching dialogue throughout all of the game. As generic as hunting down the man who wronged you sounds at first, the story actually becomes a lot deeper and more complex the more you unravel about the antagonist. The mystery regarding the beacon and your enemy's goals add a unique twist on what seems like a simple plot at first glance. Now the way you experience the story is also heavily influenced by your own choices, as the aforementioned branching dialogue options give you a lot of freedom over how your own character interacts with the environment. There's two possible paths for your character in the game, the first one being more a diplomatic approach to things and the second one being a more ruthless approach. You're not forced to stick to one path, instead you can freely choose on how Shepard behaves throughout the entire game. You can switch from being a boy scout to an absolute jerk within seconds, and unlike RPGs like Fallout 3, your good and bad karma are kept as two separate scores, so you don't have to worry about losing good guy points when the temptation to bully someone becomes too strong. And in case you can't make up your mind if you want to be good or bad, there's a neutral option in some dialogues too. This mechanic is an essential part of how the story is shaped throughout the game. You will be confronted with many decisions that have an immediate effect on your mission or have consequences for the rest of your playthrough. For example, many fates of various NPCs depend on your own decision making. There's also certain dialogue options that will open up once you reach enough points. Most of these options will make quests easier and help you reach an optimal outcome. It can be helpful to either focus on being good or being evil at first to max out those karma points. But even if you're trying to max out the good karma, you can still be a dick sometimes. And that is just because BioWare balanced the karma system so well. Perhaps the game's strongest feature is the level of world building. It is impressive for a single game to establish a universe as big, diverse and interesting. The Milky Way is home to many different races with distinctive features and respective cultures. Each species is explained in detail, from their pros and cons, the way their society works, their basic anatomy, and even how many genders they have. There's so much to learn about each race, you really don't find that in many sci-fi stories. With Mass Effect, you don't need any outside material, like in Star Wars for example, where they throw in all these weird aliens and you gotta look it up on Wikipedia to find out out which race Kit Fisto is. And since I have seen people get this wrong before, Kit Fisto is not a Twi'lek, you normies. Anyways, with Mass Effect, it's all right there. You just need to listen to the in-game dialogue. And besides all this present stuff that you can figure out, there's also tons of history that goes back millennia that you can learn. And once you learn enough backstory about the universe, you can figure out the consequences that led to conflicts, which explain a lot of the alien relations that you encounter. And for someone who hasn't played the games yet, this might sound a little confusing, but I'm gonna try to visually explain it as good as I can. Take the Ranchi Wars, for instance. The attack on the Ranchi led to the uplifting of the Krogan race, which led to the Krogan Rebellion, which then led to the Genophage, which is relevant for the entire Mass Effect trilogy, and is the reason behind the strained relation between the Krogan, the Salarian, and the Turians. And there's a ton of other examples that I could bring up, but I'm not gonna, because I'm already having a hard time pronouncing all these alien races, and I'm sorry if I mispronounce them, I'm trying my best here. Anyways, we've talked enough about the environment, let's talk about the main character for a little bit. The main character, Shepard, is a sort of blank slate, like an unwritten paper, which gives you the freedom to choose your character's upbringings, different backstories to choose from, which will actually be mentioned throughout the whole game. Nothing of too much of importance, but it's still pretty cool that they give you the option. For example, you can choose if your character grew up like Bruce Wayne without parents, or you can give him parents, whatever you feel like. You can also choose the gender of Shepard, so you can make him the male Shepard or the femme Shep, and you can customize Shepard's face completely. It can be a little hard to make a good looking face, but I feel like the male base Shepard looks the most badass, and it's also the most recognizable one. And also the dialogue throughout the whole game is influenced by the gender you chose at the beginning for your character. And they're actually really distinct, which allows you to get a second playthrough from a completely different character angle. And since you're playing as a commander after all, you also have a ship and a team. While the ship starts out with an all-human crew, Shepard will pick up various alien allies to assist him on his quest to slay evil. And also you can choose a squad that will accompany you directly on missions. The more you learn about your crew, the more you get attached to them. In fact, the alien crew members in Mass Effect 1 are considered fan favorites for good reason. And it's not like they're just NPCs who are standing around, they will actually occasionally speak up and add their input into your dialogue. Sometimes bringing a specific character to a mission can trigger some extra dialogue, like Lyra on Noveria. It's interesting to see what each character has to say during a mission. And of course, it wouldn't be a BioWare game if there wasn't also the option for romance. It is completely optional, but both the male and the female Shepard have the chance to get laid during the game. And like so many things in this game, BioWare actually made romancing feel natural. There isn't a meter that you have to max out in order to romance someone. Those meters can make it feel artificial and not part of the story. Just the way they implemented them into the dialogue makes it feel like part of the story, and the story that you get to decide on. It feels like you're slowly making progress when you're trying to romance someone, and you and your partner become closer each time you're interacting with them. The only thing I would criticize here is that the dialogue sometimes feels a little clunky and cheesy, but I mean, what you gonna do? It is definitely acceptable for a game from 2007. And BioWare would go on to make more and improved romance options in later Mass Effect games. What I also need to point out is that Mass Effect has some really good voice acting, and also a couple of big time voice actors starring in the game. Seth Green, for example, voices the pilot Joker. Nothing against silent protagonists, but it actually helps the game a lot that Shepard isn't silent. Since the main character is fully voiced, it was so much easier for me to get immersed into the story. For example, it feels like actual dialogue or banter when you talk to your teammates. And as much as a narrative-driven game benefits from good writing and developed characters, gameplay is just as crucial when it comes to third-person shooters. Basically, Mass Effect shares a lot of common traits of a third-person shooter and mixes them with RPG elements such as classes, loot, level ups, and a skill system. There are 6 different classes in this game: the Soldier, the Vanguard, the Adept, the Sentinel, the Engineer, and the Infiltrator. The classes have different perks and skills depending on what they specialize in. The Soldier, for example, makes the best use of heavy armor and can use about any weapon type in the game. While on the other hand, technology-focused classes can open decrypted crates or overheat enemies in combat. And just like in most RPGs, you level up and you get the option to upgrade your skills. And as we mentioned before, you're accompanied by your squad, which consists of 2 teammates. Every squad member has a class just like you, so in case you aren't the technician or biotic, you can have someone else fill that spot. And as soon as you figure out the best squad setup for yourself, it can make missions a lot easier. And also, not every class can use every type of weapon. If you don't have a skill for a weapon, you'd probably better be off avoiding that type. Parts of the gameplay haven't aged as well though, and the shooting shooting mechanics are a little rough around the edges. In particular, the cover system doesn't hold up as well, at least it never did for me. It feels like enemies seem to hit you regardless of where you hide. And most of the enemies move around a lot and are pretty quick, and they'll just move around your cover and aim at you directly, which kind of makes using cover feel useless. One thing that can also get pretty annoying is that Mass Effect will cry out the option to save manually during certain sections of a mission. And boy, this can really screw you over and undo a lot of progress that you have done in your mission. And on top of the janky feeling combat system, Mass Effect is sadly pretty tedious outside of the main mission, because most side missions end up being pretty repetitive. Most of the side missions revolve around you landing on different planets, and to me, the planets just don't feel distinct enough and they're more like reskins. And then you have to enter a house or enter a different building each time, and you clear out the enemies, and that's the side mission. But I mean, after all, they're side missions, so nobody's forcing you to play them. This game also has a few boss battles, but they really aren't anything to brag about. As much as the story builds up the main antagonist, his actual boss fight is just kinda meh. It just feels like you're fighting a more tankier version of a regular enemy at the end, and that's kind of the final boss fight, which isn't very exciting. But there's one aspect about the gameplay that still holds up today. You have the option to pause the game mid-combat, which will open up a little power wheel or HUD, which will enable you to use abilities and tell your squad mates what to do and where to attack. This adds a strategic layer to the combat, as you can use it to assess the situation, manage your team members and your own abilities and cooldowns, and use them to their best potential. But despite all the parts of the gameplay that feel dated, Mass Effect still manages to tell an immersive, giant sci-fi story. The story is by far the strongest part of the game. Of course, graphically the game looked more impressive 12 years ago after it launched, but even after all those years the character models are still on point. And you can see over the course of the trilogy that, graphical improvements aside of course, the characters look and remain pretty similar. And obviously, if it came out today, it wouldn't impress anyone graphically, but considering that it came out over a decade ago, it still holds up very well. Overall, Mass Effect is a game you should definitely try out. And internally, we had a little discussion about what to rate the game, but I think a solid B- is a good choice. The combat may lack the same polish applied to later entries in the franchise, but the game makes up for it with interesting characters and a big, politically charged world filled to the brim with lore and well-written story. BioWare as a studio itself may not hold up anymore, but at least one of their most recognizable classics definitely does. Well, that's it for today guys. Let me know in the comments down below what you would rate the first Mass Effect. Make sure to subscribe and also check out the videos on your screen right now. Also, I'm sorry if you were expecting Elijah's voice, I just wanted to do this one. Anyway, see you guys in our next video. Bye.